Raj, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Prey podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
So, can you give myself and the audience a little bit of background about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so the job title is Chief Scientist at Rapid7, which sounds cool. And quite frankly, it is pretty cool. So I run the vulnerability intelligence team. So, you'll have heard of some of the things we develop, like Metasploit, for example. We have a threat analytics division. We analyze and track threat actors across the globe. We effectively develop threat content for our products. And we also work with law enforcement, and there's a ton of other things that kind of come within that, but effectively what I would say is it's usually that sharp tip of the spear.
And how did you get into the field? Was this a planned thing, or was it just kind of the where your career went as you learned things and your life developed?
So I was at McAfee for 12 years, and it was McAfee, then it became I think it was then what, Intel Security, then McAfee Enterprise, then Trellix. And I was there for 12 years, and I ran the advanced threat research division, and it was very similar, but I didn't have kind of and we didn't have Metasploit there, and we didn't have Velociraptor there, and we didn't have all of these incredible kind of technologies, which is part of the reason why I came to Rapid7.
Cool. Was there a specific interest that got you into cybersecurity, an incident in your life, someone else's life, or was just like from as just part of your education, this is where you wanted to go?
Well, so I think Cliff Stoll has a lot to answer for, because I remember I remember reading the book The Cuckoo's Egg. So anybody that hasn't read it, I urge you to look at that book, because I think it was probably the only book that I know of that really kind of dissected what we do in a way that's really understandable. And I remember reading this book thinking, wow, this is incredible. This is what I want my career to go. But at the time, cybersecurity wasn't a discipline. It was a hobby.
Yeah.
And my first job was on a help desk. And at the time, it was funny because we just rolled out ISDN to some of our home workers, and we had people that were at home downloading porn. And I remember this conversation I had with someone, and I said, "Hey, should you really be doing this?" And he said, "Well, you didn't tell me not to."
Yeah.
And I saw, and I think that really kind of begun with my working life in this, because then started to do some research and said, "Oh, there's this thing called an acceptable use policy." Oh, okay, well, and then I started to introduce governance into things, and then we started to roll out AV into the estate, and so I started to take control of that, and then we started to look at dial-up attacks were really common at the time, and so we were putting, and so I think it kind of begun from having that interest, reading the book, but actually focusing my efforts on securing the enterprise, and then all of a sudden it turned out that I could actually do this for a living.
And it sounds like it's something you're very passionate and excited about.
I mean, it's cool. I mean, it is. I mean, it is. It is fun. It is. I mean, it's exhausting. I think I'm speaking to you on the back of like 3 weeks with, I think maybe hours of sleep, because we had the Move IT file transfer vulnerability, we had the Barracuda issue, um, we had what else did we have? Oh, we had the VMware problems this morning that broke. There was another one as well. There was that firewall yesterday. I can't even keep track of. I like, it's exhausting, and from the work that we do, we've got to be on it all of the time, because when it breaks, you've got to do the analysis, you've got to develop detection, you've got to be public about the detection that we have in place. So like, it doesn't afford you a weekend when you kind of plan for one, and but it's exciting because it is constantly changing and adapting, and I think that's the cool part of it. It's such an incredibly fluid environment.
Yeah. Never 2 days the same.
No, no, I mean, like today was again one of those days where I think it was like 2 days ago we released exploit code for one of these vulnerabilities, and it was like, wow, okay, we're going to get a lot of calls today.
So you kind of almost alluded to, at least in my mind, like a certain amount of transparency that has to happen within the industry. Is that in terms of here's what's going on, here's why it happened.
Well, I mean, yes, there is transparency, but there's a lot that we don't publicly disclose.
Yeah.
Like, and I know, in the introduction, before we hit record, we were talking about attribution, and or we talk about theories, and like, I'm not one of these people that will go on Twitter and just go, I think it was them, or I think it was this, or I think it was that, because people look and read us as a source of information, or a source of and a source of trust, and so we've got to be absolute about things. We've got to be as sure as we possibly can, and when it comes to things like attribution, we're really careful about what we say. So we won't go out and say, oh, it's country X and country Y. We'll use the diamond model. We'll use the diamond model to try to determine methodologies around our confidence rating, and that's important. But again, it's hard because you have to be right all of the time, and if
Yeah.
you're not, then the 20 plus years you have, your reputation starts to be impacted. And so those are some of the challenges I think we face.
Hmm. Are there is there a small set of kind of threat actor groups which are responsible for a majority of the incidents and the hacks and the exploits, or is it often just a very, or do you believe it's just a very, very wide range of individual loose affiliations of individuals?
Well, so in 2013, I wrote this paper called Cybercrime Exposed, and it was called Cybercrime. I don't know. It was a long time ago, but I wrote this paper. I talked about cybercrime as a service, and at the time, it was really highlighting this kind of ecosystem and an economy where individuals will go out and rent or hire or acquire services or talent in order to carry out specific attacks. Because historically, we used to have this perception that it was, a one-to-one ratio between the victim and the developer.
Yeah.
And I'd say really kind of over the last decade, we've seen that really change. And, none more so, I think, within the ransomware space, where you see this kind of affiliate model come into place, and, subcontractors are used then to carry out certain attacks. So I would say probably it's incredibly fluid. And, like, for example, threat actors will go to an RDP shop in order to acquire credentials. Or you look at some of the recent vulnerabilities that we've seen. I mean, those are non-trivial vulnerabilities. It's not, it's not a brute force attack by any stretch of the imagination. And so you think to yourself, well, how on earth can something this non-trivial be in the hands of for example, a ransomware group who are clumsy at best?
Yeah.
And so you kind of start to put together this jigsaw puzzle of, well, actually, if this is state sponsored, then perhaps what they did was they made this vulnerability accessible, or they made the exploit available to low end actors in order to obfuscate what they were really doing. But again, those are theories that you speculate on, and in the absence of physical means to interrogate, we're left with these theories without the ability to be able to back up what we suspect is happening. And that's part of the challenge. It's constantly kicking ideas, discussing with the teams, trying to think about what's actually occurring. But in many ways, you really only have like 30-40% of the answer.
Hmm. Do probably a slight shift. Do bounty programs? Do you think that they help reduce exploits in the wild, or is it that like
Well,
companies just
vulnerability.
can't compete with the price that someone can get on the black market for an exploit?
No, so like vulnerabilities, sure, absolutely. But, and I think like this is where the nuance comes in, because, a lot of the development that we're doing today focuses around elements of a specific vulnerability that can be used in order to be able to operationalize security. So, for example, most people listening think, well, gosh, I get so many alerts, I don't know what to do with it, or I've got so many systems I need to patch. Where do I start? But we look at this from a binary perspective. You can't realistically go to an organization or the IT organization and say, hey, by the way, there's another vulnerability. Guess what?
Yeah.
We need to bring down the infrastructure. Hey, guess what? There's another one. Like you can't do that. And I think that's where we've got to start thinking about things like nuance, so like or context, where we say, well, okay, this particular vulnerability needs local access in order to be able to execute. Well, maybe what we do is we kind of put that into next month's patching cycle. This one is actually has remote code execution, but hey, guess what? It's not what we know. It's not being actively exploited. So maybe we don't have to like bring the business down and patch this. And this particular one, hey, guess what? It's being actively exploited. It's targeting our sector. It's targeting our geo. Okay, well, all hands to the pump. And I think because we can't continue down
Yeah.
this all or nothing approach. So what you'll see and what the area of investment that we're taking is around incorporating context into alerts. And we have this repository called attackerkb.com, for example, and it's free to access, by the way. So there's a lot of that we do which is open source. But in Attacker KB, we'll analyze the most critical CVEs. We'll tell you how it works, but we'll also tell you if it's been exploited in the wild. And that type of nuance, I think, is often lost in security operations. And
Yeah.
I think the sooner organizations or the sooner we collectively as an industry can start to provide more transparency, I think the better we'll be.
Yeah, I had a little stint in IT, and that was, like you said, it was okay. I only have so much resources. I only have so much time. I can only take down everybody's work for so long. What do I patch? Kind of what do I patch first? What issues do I address first?
Well, and I think that's the problem because it was funny. I had a conversation with a customer this morning, and I used to be a CISO myself, and when I was a CISO, my manager refused to see me, like outright would not see me because he said every time you come and see me, you bring a problem. And every time I give you investment, all you do is find more problems. Like I remember we did a whole piece of work around user education. And what that meant was more people could spot more nefarious things happening and were reporting more.
Yeah.
And then they said, well, if I'd have known that you would have created more asks and more demands for investment, I wouldn't have given it to you in the first place. And that's the challenge, is that every other part of the business can come to the business and say, if you give me X amount of investment, there will be Y amount of value to the business.
Yeah.
And we're an industry that can't even measure our success. Like I actually asked them and I said, so how does the board know that you're successful, or how do you determine that there's not, that the investment is well made? And I said, well, we've not had a breach. I said, yeah, but then what that means is when you do get a breach, you're out. And I
Yeah.
went, yeah. And we've seen that, right? We've seen CISOs being let go when a breach happens. And you and I know that, like, more than likely those CISOs actually were aware of the risk, had put it on the risk register, and just didn't get the investment in order to be able to mitigate that risk. It's incredibly immature as an industry for us because we just don't have those metrics in order to be able to articulate the value of what we do.
And I think that is absolutely the difficulty. If you can't say I stopped this many attacks, it's hard to define how much did I save, how much money did I save the company because these attacks didn't get through or were not effective. I don't know.
But then we become insurance salesmen. Then it's
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, guess what? I stopped something, like I stopped something that might have happened that didn't happen, but therefore look how great. I mean, that no one cares about that. And I've seen people use those metrics, like I stopped 25 million attacks this month, and he's like, yeah, big deal, man. He had a port scan. Like, who cares?
That reminds me of the time when we used to talk about hits to websites.
Oh
Well,
yeah.
let me just put a couple more images on the page, and now I've tripled my hits.
Oh, my favorite one is impressions on Twitter. I see
Yes.
those. Oh, I had 65,000 impressions on Twitter, and I'm like, okay, well done, I guess.
And how many of them clicked on your post?
Yeah.
Two.
Oh yeah, no, this fixation on Twitter just drives me crazy. In fact, like honestly, like the last couple of weeks, I've been like, do I just quit? Do I just leave? And then we're on Mastodon, and Mastodon's like, it's not really, it's not, it's, I don't know. I miss Twitter 2022, 2022 Twitter. I do. Actually, no, pre 2016 Twitter.
We go back a few extra years.
Well, no, but you remember what life was like in 2015, right? It was like, you know, with just the whole Cambridge Analytica stuff kicking off, and like all of these, it was just the world kind of turned on its head, I think, from 2016, and it just went like crazy. And then you had the pandemic thrown in, and then you had like elections, and it's just like, oh, I sound old. I'm wishing for the old days.
So did the pandemic fundamentally change your business model or threat assessment and how people do threat assessment?
Well, so that was a funny one because when the pandemic hit, so it was 2019, wasn't it? It's 2019, and I think it was March when we had the first lockdown. But in February, I ended up rupturing my Achilles, had a hematoma, and was given an hour to live by the hospital. Like it was like crazy. And then for 6 months, I didn't walk. And I was sitting there watching the news. And I remember I got a call from my boss, and I was in the hospital, and he said, are we seeing any attacks? I was like, well, no. I mean, there's been a couple of apps, there's been a bit of misinformation, but no, nothing at all. And then around about March, we just saw this explosion of COVID noise from low end BEC scams to
Yeah.
threat groups that we believe to be nation state attributed to misinformation. I mean, it just exploded. Where I think I guess people that were doing physical crime just kind of went, oh, okay, well, if I send a bunch of emails and pretend to sell PPE, I can make a ton of money. And it's like, oh shit, this works. All right, I'll continue to do this. And so I think, and of course, on the back of it, we had all of these businesses that were, physical, digital, then went entirely digital, but
Yeah.
did so by like, I don't know, like opening up RDP out to the internet, going, well, now we can access all of our resources. What's the worst that can happen? Okay, yeah, right. Then we saw the growth of ransomware at that time, and I think it was the Netwalker group we tracked for like 3 months in that period, and we were tracking the wallets, and they made $25 million in 3 months. Yeah, yeah. So that, yeah, I mean, I think for those of us in cybersecurity, and I always say this, I try to speak to like schools about coming into the industry. You if you come into this industry, you won't sleep a lot. You'll constantly be reading, but the likelihood is you will stay employed.
Yeah. And 2 days will never be the same.
No, exactly, exactly. I mean, why wouldn't you do? Why? I'm trying to convince my kids to do it, and they're not having it. I'm trying so hard. I'm so disappointed.
But
I feel like I let them down.
but do anyone's kids want to go into the same industry as their parents?
Yeah, but but like they've had visibility of stuff. Like I remember we hacked the Tesla, and they've seen that, and we've had coffee. Like we've done like they've seen so much cool things, and I'm like, why wouldn't you want to do this?
Other passions.
Oh, we'll see, we'll see. I'm not waving the white flag yet.
So where do you see as, maybe not what's happening today, but what do you see on the horizon as kind of the what keeps you up at night of, oh gosh, I hope the hackers don't XYZ?
I mean, it's happening now, right? The worst. I mean, because I don't want to sound like a miserable git, but like hospitals I've turned patients away. I mean, that's happening. That's happened 7 years ago
Hmm.
with WannaCry, right? I mean, that happened and is happening and continues to happen. Um, People's medical records are being stolen and sold and traded by criminals. This is this is the world that we live in, and people go, well, "What's the worst thing that can happen?" Well, that happens right now, and you look at. I don't want to take it down this
Yeah.
path, but like you look at how child trafficking occurs, and you look at these particular nefarious groups that are trading and sharing image. Like this is the world that we live in. Crime is being played out digitally in front of us, and we as security professionals, we are that thin line, I believe, that does everything we can to educate, to protect, to share indicators in order to protect what's going on. And I think what we fail to do, I think collectively, is articulate the impact that it has. Because you remember when the meat packer got popped, or when there was the petroleum company that got hit by ransomware, like we saw the real life impact of
Yeah.
that. And what we do is we talk about APT 28, but not the fact that this particular individual that's on a 0 hours contract was informed that they couldn't go in and do a day's work, and the fear that they had that would have upon their ability to pay their bills or feed their children. And I think we've removed the human from the story, and subsequently then we just kind of go, oh, okay, yeah, this latest vuln or this latest issue. But what we've got to do more of is kind of remind people and say, look, it's like when you put a seatbelt on before you get in the car. Well, you do that because if you have an accident, well, we've seen what happens.
Yeah.
Same thing here. Like if you don't spend time with your children and talk to them about not posting images of themselves and sharing that with friends, like I've seen the impact it has.
Yeah.
Because when I was at McAfee, we were a consumer company, so I would go and speak. We sponsored Bletchley Park, so I would go and speak to schools or speak to kids and parents about, well, cybersecurity does impact you, and here's why. And so, I think what keeps me up at night and what scares me is the stuff that we're dealing with today, but actually the impact of what we deal with today.
Mm-hmm. Is there kind of do you envision the future of a more digital international law enforcement agency, so to speak? People that might, because I see one of the difficulties from my perspective I see is that it's burglary is someone in my neighborhood breaks into my house, takes my stuff, and sells them at a pawn shop in my neighborhood, and the local law enforcement can intervene. When it's digital and it's online, it's, well, okay, well, my bank account in this country got attacked by this person in that country, and the money went to this other fourth country, and then all of a sudden it just becomes like even the smallest cybercrime becomes a multinational affair.
No, I mean we'll never have a single law enforcement agency. I don't think that's ever going to happen. We have international collaboration, and I mean, full disclosure, I'm affiliated with Europol, so the European Cybercrime Centre, and they have the Joint Cybercrime Action Task Force with liaison officers from around the world. Incredibly successful, incredibly powerful, absolutely exceptional. And I'll call out Charles Orting for his vision and his leadership to set that up. But there will be nations that will not participate.
Yeah.
And we see the impact of that. Like, law enforcement agencies that have to issue a mutual legal assistance treaty in order to be able to get whois data is freaking crazy.
Yeah.
So we know that the odds are stacked in the favor of attackers.
Mm-hmm.
With that point whereby they only have to be right once, we've got to protect and stop everything. Or the asymmetry of information where they can actually get access to everything they want, and we have to piece things together with threat intelligence. And so will we ever have a single law enforcement covering the whole globe? I don't see it, because you look at geopolitics today.
Yeah.
They're not going to sit around a table.
Well, we all agree on everything, don't we?
Oh, but it's like saying,
Yeah.
well, hey, can we get every nation to agree to harmonize national security requirements across the globe? No.
Yeah.
No, I mean, and I don't want to kind of get too far deep into this, but like there is a natural scrap and fight for resources. There is a natural scrap, and so there will be countries that will try to extend their reach in order to be able to gain access to some of these assets, and that will in fact create friction and tension. So this is the shape of the world that we live in. We're 8 billion people on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
And every government is trying to do the best they can for their citizens. And at some point, that will be at the cost of other citizens.
Yeah. As we have our dramatic pause on that.
I realize that's pretty
It's
I
heavy.
kind of feel like at the end of that was a pretty dark finish, I think.
Let's go more positive and talk about some of the things that you have been a part of that are having a real world impact on individuals on stopping stuff. I know that you're involved in nomoreransom.org. What do they do?
So no more ransom.org. We were kind of born out of 2016, really out of all of these types of ransomware attacks that began to kind of spread into the enterprise. And what we had the success of, we actually had some takedowns where we actually got access to decryption keys. And the sense was, well, okay, well, we've got these decryption keys, but like, where does anyone go to get them? Because you don't know where they all are.
Yeah.
And so we launched this initiative in 2016. We had 7 decryptors and we made them available. And then over the course of the years, we've started to increase the number of partners and increase the number of decryptors. And so now we're at about 150 free decryptors. We don't ask you for your email address. We don't track your IP address. And we just tell you the variant of ransomware you've been impacted by. And then we give you a free decryptor if there is one. And we are at least, and I would say at least, because it's in some cases we don't really get the telemetry on whether a decryption was successful or not. But we're at around about $1 billion, we believe, in terms of crime prevented. So
That's amazing.
that was, yeah, and that was a while back. So I'm sure it's more than that now.
So, how does the end user know which key they're supposed to get?
Oh, so I think we changed the name of it. We had a crypto sheriff, and we give you the opportunity to upload an encrypted file, and then we'll do the analysis and we'll tell you the variant.
Oh, that's
And
cool.
yeah, I think so. But I think the thing that people fail to acknowledge on No More Ransom is that the best part of this is the ability to be able to report crime. So we've got a ton of opportunities and links there where you kind of go through to report a crime, pick the country, click on the link, and then you can actually submit a file to your law enforcement agency in order for them to be able to measure the impact of ransomware.
That's awesome that you make that you facilitate the reporting as part of the process of helping people decrypt.
Well, it wasn't my idea. That I've got to say, like when you have like all of these law enforcement agencies on there, it's pretty much like the first thing they say. For us, from a tech perspective, we're like, oh, rare ransomware decryptors, right? We'll create a portal. And then when you have law enforcement, they're like, yeah, but we would like to start to measure this because that's part of the problem is we just
Yeah.
don't know what we don't know, and people don't report crime like they would if your house got burgled or your computer got stolen. And so if we're not reporting it, we don't know the impact of it. And if we don't know the impact of it, then politicians won't give it the investment it needs. And so
Yeah.
it's the same thing happens in the enterprise.
Is it that do you believe it's people don't report it because they don't know where to report it or they don't think it's worth reporting? Like if someone broke into my car, this is purely from my perspective. If someone broke into my car, it would make perfect sense. Oh yeah, let me call my local law enforcement, call the police department of the city that it happened in. Yeah, that's the right thing to do. If I had a laptop get ransomware, I do good backups. I would just reformat it and go on with my life and probably not even think about it.
Yeah. Well, and worse, like some people will probably report ransomware, I guess, depending upon the impact that it has. But if you have a crypto miner on your computer,
Yeah,
I'm not bothered,
yeah,
right? And then, but then what we then end up happening is we end up having these adware, right? Because I remember when we were at McAfee, obviously we had the consumer part. We used to have this category called potentially unwanted programs or
yeah.
PUPs, and we knew the whole PUP market was like massively profitable for criminals. But nobody really bothered about it because then law enforcement go, well, okay, what's the impact that it has to our economy? Well, probably not a lot, because we don't know because people aren't reporting it, but
Yeah.
people aren't reporting it because it's so insignificant. I can just go into the registry and just delete some registry keys and then delete the things that pop up at startup and I'm good. But actually, if I reported that and everybody reported that, then we can kind of go, well, actually, they're making tens of millions of dollars. And so then maybe we can do something. So that's the thing. We just don't have, well, there's just opaqueness about this whole cyber crime area.
Hmm. And again, like, probably the internationalness. Gosh, what a horrible word. The fact that this is a global issue presents its own. Well, if I'm here, I report there, I report to them, but you report to them. That kind of
But
that.
that's why, but I think that's why like JCAT's so important, because then you have international liaison officers who have the ability to be able to determine the impact that it has to individual nations, and then you can actually have one of the law enforcement agencies actually act as the lead for that. And so I think that's why international law enforcement collaboration is so important, because you're right, almost any crime now is either digital crime or digital enabled crime. And
Yeah.
so having that ability to be able to coordinate and collaborate is so important.
Interesting. Interesting. Do you have any plans of, are there plans to expand No More Ransom to other cybercrimes?
Well,
Or are you
I
just trying to
know.
keep it as a decrypter
Well,
specific?
no, so I think no more ransom. Like it's. I think no more ransom is one that kind of makes sense. I mean, I just don't know, and I guess maybe. I mean, I guess maybe, but I don't know how you would do that for, like, how would you do that for DDoS?
Uh,
What are we going to give you? Well, like
yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know, and I think that's why ransomware is probably the right vehicle, because hey, there is a lock, we will give you a key.
Yeah.
It's easy. How would you do that for DDoS, or how would you do that for crypto miners? Like, I don't know how you would do that. Um, but I mean, but there's other things, right? There's
Yeah.
other things like the Cyber Threat Alliance, so sharing indicators with our, peers in the industry, and there's a ton of additional kind of working groups and collaborations and ISACs that we're constantly partnering with and sharing intelligence. And I think that to me is the really great part, because we're not in competition with each other, we're in competition with the adversary, and the
Yeah.
adversary is is good.
Yeah.
Well, not all of them are good, but they're good, and they're quick, and they're fast, and they're successful, and they're well resourced, and they're well funded. So we have to do what we can to do the same.
So speaking of funding, all of the ransomware I've seen is always payments always via crypto. Are there resources that track wallets used in crypto to try to reduce the amount of money that's sent to them?
Well, so certainly tracking the wallets, absolutely. But then, of course, they have ways in which to wash the money and split the payments up and put it through. So yes, there are groups and companies that we will work with and collaborate with and coordinate with, and of course there is a level of transparency there, and I think that's why things like Netwalker, the analysis was so successful, because we were able to track the wallets. But of course, washing the money is something that they have professionals to do
Yeah.
for them. So that's part of the ecosystem, and I think that's some of the challenges that we face, is that a well-resourced and well-funded group can go out and hire individuals for specific functions that they're very good at. So like, they can have somebody to do initial entry attacks. So they'll actually hire people to break into organizations, and they'll have people that will do lateral movement, and so whereas before it was, here is an email, click on the link, you're infected. Now they kind of went, well, actually, if we had people that knew their way around a network, then perhaps what we can do is we can find a way to extort more money from them. And that's part of the challenge that we face, is that it's an economy,
Yeah.
and they can afford to pay well.
Yeah. And people will, they want their data or they're afraid of sextortion. Some small percentage of people will pay, and that becomes its own problem.
Oh, but I don't know if it's a small percentage. I mean, you look at the numbers that they're making. I mean, they're not insignificant.
Yeah. I guess I think in terms of like sextortion emails that when I get them, one of the things I always do is look at the wallet and see how much money it's gotten in the last 24, 48 hours, and maybe it's gotten a couple $1,000. But I guess if you're sending that out to millions and millions and millions of people, it doesn't take many for it to be highly profitable for the individual who's sending it.
Yeah, that was that old book. Do you remember the old book? I think it was called Spam Kings.
Yeah.
And yeah, like we're showing our age here, I think. But like when you read Spam Kings, that's what they relied upon. They would send spam out, and if only 0.1 or 0.2% of people fell for the trap, it's fine.
Yeah.
Because it was easy, right? You find a couple of open mail relays and just send a ton of emails, and you'll get some wins back. And I think that's the biggest advantage criminals have, I think. I mean, okay, sure, geography helps. Absolutely. I think yes, you can be in territories and regions, but look, and sure, hiding underneath the surface web helps, but we've seen dark web shops being shuttered as well.
Yeah.
But for me, their biggest advantage is automation. They can simply send things at scale. And like you said, like from a spam, or sending a BEC fraud scam, like for example, they can send a ton of emails, or if they want to do a more targeted attack, they can go on the social media account of the CFO, for example. And so like
Yeah.
they have the opportunity to be able to automate a lot of this. And that's the biggest advantage I think they have. But then equally, we have automation ourselves. We have, machine learning. So yeah, this is constant game of cat and mouse.
Do you see more of the threats that you look at as being targeted or widespread in that they're just, we're going to port scan we're going to scan every web server we can find for this particular Apache exploit
Yeah.
versus I'm trying to get into IBM's accounting department?
So I think so I think a lot of it's opportunistic. An awful lot of it's opportunistic, which means, hey, there is a new, or there is an O day, or there is an unpatched system. We'll go and do that, and we'll go and target that. What I suspect, though, is that there is a level of targeting, and certainly some of the cases we've had to deal with, it just, how they got in, or how they crafted an email, or convinced a third-party contractor to do something who was connected to the corporate network via the corporate VPN. So I think there is probably an element of both.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, there's just so much of it that's opportunistic that we can't see the signals amongst the noise.
Gotcha.
So if you look at prevalence of exploitation against a very, very common entry or a common attack, you're constantly kind of fighting against thousands and thousands of systems that are compromised. So I think that's part of the challenge, is that trying to find the signals amongst the noise becomes difficult, especially in an attack where a vulnerability or an exploit has been publicly made available or is released.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I used to, running whatismyipaddress.com, I get lots of people saying, oh, I turned on packet sniffing on my router, and oh my gosh, there's hundreds of people trying to attack me. Well, no, they're yes and no. It's not you they're trying to attack. They're just scanning everything.
Well, did you see? By the way, I love whatismyipaddress.com. I have used it. I have used it in anger myself. But there was this company that released a study today about RDP. They basically released an RDP honeypot. I'm trying to find the number, but yeah, that was it for the year. The RDP honeypot had 13 million login events.
Yeah.
They weren't targeting you, and they were brute forcing,
Yeah.
using administrator or admin. Okay, guess what? That's quite a lot. But again, that doesn't mean that there are 13 million threat actors out there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there could be, but probably not. I don't
No,
know.
that's it. It's automation. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something will flag up and say, "Hey, I'm in." Bosh, there you go. And then all of a sudden, it kind of launches to something else. And so that's the advantage they have, is that they can automate these scans, go across the internet. Hey, we're in. Okay, fine. I'll get to that in a minute.
And then it's like, oh, well, what did we get into? Let's try to figure that out. And then a little bit more intelligence and forethought goes into potentially what happens after that.
Well, and certainly if it's an organization that's a large, then all of a sudden they'll get people that will come in and say, well, actually, look, that's quite a valuable company. Then we can determine if it's ransomware. And yeah, like we're not dealing with, that archetypal stereotype that, is the bane of our industry. The hoodie. That's not the issue. It's organized crime, or it's state-sponsored attack, and that's it. That's what it is. It's not. It's not. It's unlikely to be somebody just doing it for kicks. It's an industry, and it makes money. And I think the sooner we start to try to kind of go back against that particular notion, and like for me, for example, I'll never use the words hacker. I
Hmm.
just don't. I just think it's not accurate. It's criminals. They are criminals. They're conducting crime. They are extorting or blackmailing. That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
We've got to try to move away from these lazy stereotypes, I feel.
The hacker was the person who was just looking to see, can they get in, not actually trying to do anything wrong. Now the organized crime has moved in and, hey, we're going to use this to make money.
I think I did my CISSP, gosh, when was it? Over 20 years ago. And I still remember one of the questions, which was, can you explain the definition of a hacker? And the definition of the hacker then was not somebody with criminal intent.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
somebody with curiosity. And what was the term for someone with a criminal intent? I think they used to call it cracker, didn't they? I think they said.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think it was a cracker.
I mean, we don't use that term.
No, we realize we have lots of silly phrases. Let's just stop using them.
Yeah, but again, I don't think these stereotypes help us. Like,
No.
you go and speak to like somebody in a leadership position, or you speak to somebody like a head of state, and you talk about DDoS or exfil or C2s, and they just look at you like you just landed from another planet. So that's and that's why I love Cliff Stoll's book. I still love that book, which is, it was done in a way that people can understand. And I cannot tell you the number of people I've given that book to as a gift, hoping that they would read it.
What is the complete title of the book? I want to make sure that we link it in the show notes.
Oh, Cliff Stoll, The Cuckoo's Egg.
The Cuckoo's Egg. Okay, we'll make sure to link it in the show notes for those who want to read it.
Oh, it's funny. I probably should have like given you links to my books, but like my books are very boring. Apologies to my co-authors, but yeah, they're like really thick technical manuals and stuff. But
What
that.
what are your books?
So I did with Eric Knapp, who is literally one of my most favorite people on the planet. I did Applied Cybersecurity in the Smart Grid. With Jim Revis and Brian Honan, we did the CSA, the Cloud Security Alliance's Guide to Cloud Computing. And then I've done a couple of technical editing as well, a couple of books as well, which I won't get into. But
both of those sound pretty technical to begin with. And to think that it gets more technical from there.
Well, but I had fun writing them. I will tell you, like, I remember I asked Dave Litchfield Jr. and I said, "Oh, Dave, because Dave did the Database Hackers Handbook." And I said, "Oh, Dave, I'm thinking of writing a book." This was years back. I said, "Dave, I'm thinking of writing a book." And he went, "It's not as glamorous as you think, Raj." I went, "Really?" And he went, "No." And I went, "Don't get any, you don't get paid much. You don't know." I went, "Okay, thanks, Dave." He was right, by the way. He was absolutely right. Dave usually is right.
As we wrap up here, any particular other additional resources you want to mention, or where can people find you online? Not that you want to be found online.
Well, for now, still on Twitter, Raj_Samani. LinkedIn obviously is still there. If I don't accept, like, I'm super paranoid, so I apologize on LinkedIn in advance. But resources, look, Attacker KB is a free resource you can use. No More Ransom, again, phenomenal resource. Everyone should know Metasploit, but Metasploit, obviously, Velociraptor, pretty much the original, or one of the greatest DFIR tools that out in existence. Big props to Mike Cohen and Matt Green. But look, we'll keep sharing information about the latest vulnerabilities, the latest threats, the latest attacks. We've got to work together as an industry, and I will post everything that I possibly can, share as much as I possibly can, and if If you don't like it or you think we can do more or less, just let me know. My DMs are open for the moment, but I think recently Twitter's just become a bit of a madhouse. So I'm getting so much spam in there. I might have to close it. But for now, my DMs are open and you can just let me know, and let's do what we can to make a more safe society.
Awesome. Raj, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Prey podcast today.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invite.